This computer. Perfect. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Yeah, it's my first session. I guess you can call it like catch up with friends and what have you. So it's an afternoon with Kevin Zhao. He's the director of finance at PixieSet. Yeah, today we're gonna find out. Kevin has a very interesting journey. I won't go into his bio. I'm not gonna read it word from word. I'm just gonna say how what I know about him and how we met and all that, and then I'll let him kind of take it away. Yeah, so we're just gonna do quick introductions, and then I have some questions I prepared, just for Kevin to answer. And then as when we're done those, feel free to enter your questions on the chat. I'll be monitoring that. Or if you're brave enough, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask Kevin himself. Where I met Kevin at TD. We were both tellers at the time, and we were both very competitive, and so we were always want to sell credit card, or we want to send a referral to the advisor, and then we have to write a card for clients for customer service. So we were always trying to one up each other, we kind of went through the trenches. I went on to be a financial planner at TD. And he, pursued accounting. I mean, we both had accounting designations. Oh, no, sorry, we had specializations. He actually got the accounting designation. I got my CFP instead. But the interesting thing about Kevin is, and a lot of students always ask, is kind of, is it, finance or is it accounting? Like, which designation, should I get? Is it a CPA or is it a CFA? A second year, I remember having issues, not issues, but like just having a hard time choosing between the two. So here we have an example of Kevin, who kind of went through the CPA program, and then he did a lot of M&A work with Deloitte, and then from there he went into industry with now PixieSet. And so without further ado, hopefully it can answer a lot of the questions that students may have about, like, oh no, like, I have to choose between accounting and finance, or I'm going to do double specialization and I still don't know what I want to do. Hopefully today's discussion, we can kind of unlighten kind of what that journey was like for Kevin, and what the industry is like in finance, and what it looks like to be a CPA in an M&A type like role. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you for your time. So I'll first question for you is, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and fill in the gaps a little bit, and your current company.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Hey, everyone. So my name's Kevin Zhao. I'm the director of finance for PixieSet Media, Inc. Ken already gave kind of the brief introduction about myself. Went to UBC, born and raised in Vancouver, studied accounting and business technology management. For those of you that do go to UBC, I was actually in the Bucks program at first. So my first year I went through Bucks, which is the business and computer science program. And then, just thought about kind of where my career path, where I wanted to be in my career path, and decided to go the accounting route. And that actually opened up my schedule to work at TD and meet Kenold and lots of other people and get some real work experience. As I was going through accounting, I said, hey, should I do finance? Should I do a second specialization? I was actually looking at things like law and society, or just something else to kind of fill up the time. And just to broaden my horizons a little bit, and decided to go into business tech just because it was not only a very interesting industry, but it kind of connected with where I was studying previously in the business and computer science program. I spent 4 years at UBC, graduated, took an internship in the Deloitte M&A practice, so M&A meaning mergers and acquisitions advisory. And worked in their transaction services department. So really what that is transaction diligence, or buy-side financial due diligence is kind of the core of the business. And that's really focusing on when our clients are acquiring another business. We're going in, we're vetting the financials, we're looking at earnings, we're looking at cash flow, we're looking at kind of all the components of a transaction that need to be accounted for from a pricing perspective. So we don't do the hardcore kind of valuation models necessarily in diligence, but we vet all the numbers and we kind of diligence everything that goes into the offer that's submitted, especially from a financial perspective. So, things like COVID impacts to businesses. As a buyer, how much are you willing to pay for those COVID impacts? If it's a positive or if it's a negative. I'll give an example. Healthcare, big booming industry, especially during COVID. And so there's a lot of positive impacts. So businesses that are selling masks, for instance, they're getting a ton of revenue that's a bit one-time in nature. Not necessarily one time, but it's probably not something that's going to continue for the remainder of kind of the business cycle. And so as a buyer, you have to look at it and kind of unravel, hey, this company did great, but 50% of their revenues were from masks, and they're not a mask producing company typically. They're kind of a more one time, this is just part of our apparel business, and so we're going to launch masks, and great, we made $50 million of revenue. Well, that's not recurring in nature. And so as a diligence specialist, we go in and we tell our clients, well, look, great, this is revenue, but you don't want to necessarily be paying such a high multiple or such a high valuation based off of that particular situation that's really one time in nature. Because as a buyer, you're not going to be able to take over that revenue from a go forward basis. So that's really kind of what I worked on in transaction diligence. I also did some sell side, helping sellers prepare for transactions. I did some mergers as well. And so, really it's from buy to sell to mergers and kind of all through the life cycle. So it was a really interesting experience. Spent I think it was 2 years there. And then moved on to our corporate finance practice, which is the investment banking arm of Deloitte. And that's where I focused exclusively on sellers. So helping entrepreneurs, mid-sized private business owners sell their businesses or raise capital. So not necessarily in the venture capital space, but on the more mid-size. So typically our clients would be somewhere in revenues from 25 to 125 million. With earnings somewhere between 5 million of EBITDA or earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization to anywhere up to 50 million or plus. And that's kind of my clientele. I worked a lot on, I'd say, tech companies. PixieSet was actually one of my clients. Some, what do you call it? There's a little bit of pharmaceuticals in there. I did some aerospace transactions as well, and healthcare. Healthcare was another big focus of mine, and then kind of just consumer products in general, whether it's D2C or kind of retail. So I have a fair bit of kind of broad experience, and then after I'd say total 5 years at Deloitte, went over to PixieSet Media, which again was one of my clients. We're a tech company that's focused on photography software solutions. And so if you ever, attend a wedding or you go to a particular event where there's photographers, a lot of times the photographers will use PixieSet's software, which is a gallery delivery platform. So the way I like to think about it is kind of like Dropbox in a way for photographers, but it's more dedicated towards actually presentable and really kind of beautiful designs. So again, if you go to a wedding, let's say I went to Kendall's wedding a few years ago and his photographer took really nice photos, and Kendall wants to share that with all the people that attended the wedding. Instead of sending me a USB or sending me individual photos, he would be able to send me a link that his photographer has created, which stores all of the photos, all of the edited photos, the ones that make him and his wife look really awesome, and be able to kind of share that with me in a really, really nice way. And then, the other parts of what PixieSet does alongside the gallery solution is a website builder. So if you guys are familiar with Squarespace or Wix, we kind of do similar to what they do, except it's a much simpler platform. So we allow people, whether it's photographers, whether it's creative professionals or hobbyists or whoever, create websites in the span of under 2 hours using dedicated themes, platform, so on and so forth, as well as supporting the back end for photographers or small business owners. So that includes things like e-signatures, contracts, so on and so forth. So long spiel, that's kind of my journey and how I got to where I am today. Kendall, are we okay to do maybe quick intros with the group? I'd
Yeah,
love to
for
kind
sure.
of hear what everybody's here for, and this way I'm not talking for like 45 minutes straight.
Yeah,
But
sure,
yeah, I would
absolutely.
love to hear kind of your guys' background as well, what you're looking for, what I can help with, and this way I kind of can spend my time talking about things that actually matter to you guys, and I'm not just kind of talking to myself for the rest of this time.
Oh, that's a great idea. So yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and introduce before I call on names. I don't think I have to with a group of solder students. I think you guys are more than capable.
Will, why don't you go first?
Me?
Yeah.
Everyone knows who I am. All right. I mean, I can go for the next 45 minutes. They all know that. So I'm Ken Old, certified financial planner with Rise Above Finance. I like to call myself a wealth coach. And so I'm not just focused on financial planning. I do things like this for students and what have you, because I really believe in holistic living in terms of not just make as much money as you can and then retire at a certain age. It's, why can't we work and live at the same time and not just kind of chase that 65 or 60 or whatever that goal is kind of do the things you love, and let me kind of be your planner and be your coach to help you live those dreams and make sure the finances are there. So that's me. I'm sure a lot of people know about me already, so I won't take too much time. You know what? I'm just gonna call on someone. Will, go ahead. And then go pick
Awesome.
someone else after that. Yeah.
Yeah, so my name's Will Chisholm. I was born and raised in Banff National Park. I grew up there my whole life. I came to UBC Solder just for my passion for business and sort of the number side of things. I'm currently interested in finance and accounting. So what you guys both have sort of have experience in, and I'm just looking to sort of broaden my knowledge on what goes into those industries, what happens behind the scenes, sort of gauge where I want to be in the future and try and like narrow down my interests early so that I can sort of launch a good career path in the future.
James, you're next.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Hey guys, I'm James. I'm a first year at Solder, and I initially came in thinking I would specialize in accounting or finance, right? Like the generic stuff. But then afterwards, I grew more of an interest in tech. So now I'm looking at like software development and also game development. But me being here today, what I mostly wanted to learn about was what opportunities there were for roles that combine that interest for both finance and tech beyond just like fintech, let's say. But yeah, nice to meet all of you guys.
Margarita.
All right, hi everyone. I'm Margarita, and I'm in third year here at Solder. I'm specializing in finance with a concentration in business analytics. I've always kind of like since I came to Solder, I kind of knew I wanted to go into finance. When I was in high school, I actually thought I was going to go into science, but I really like the whole number side of things, analysis. But there are also a lot of career paths within finance and within like analysis as well. And I'm kind of trying to think about maybe pivoting a little bit into tech. Like we'll see how things go, but I wanted to hear different career paths other than the typical investment banking, doing the CFA, stuff like that.
Catchy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kachi. I'm also a first year at Solder. I was really hoping to look into specializing into either finance or marketing. I just wanted like a way to, I was in terms of finance, I was interested in like finding a way to combine it with like more creative passions. That's why I was really interested by how you're working with PixieSet. So yeah, just really looking into, the creative side of finance and ways to kind of, like Margarita said, exploring careers there that are not necessarily as, standard as, banking and that type of thing. So nice to meet you all.
Josh.
Hey everyone, my name is Josh and I'm in my 4th year. I also go to Sauder. Currently specializing in accounting and operations and logistics. And my interest kind of lies in supply chain. And the reason why I wanted to pair it up with accounting is I thought that it would be useful in terms of looking at it from a managerial perspective and seeing how a company can perform outside of its different KPIs and whatnot. And so I think, yeah, I'm just very curious to hear other accounting options that's not within a firm. Like you mentioned, a lot of M&A work that you did. And so that's pretty interesting to hear as well.
Thanks, Josh. Last but not least, Evie.
Hi, my name is Evie. I'm currently a second year. I'm thinking about specializing in accounting and then getting my CPA. I'm also thinking about double specialize in BTM, or I'm just gonna do a concentration in data analytics. And then right now for me, it's just a bunch of chaos right now because I'm applying to co-op also at the same time, and then doing with school and then doing some other extracurricular activities. So I guess what I want to learn from this session was mainly like, how do I manage all the stuff? And then also like, how do I deal with like setbacks, I guess.
Thank you. So Kevin, did you want to kind of pick some of those questions that was or those interests and kind of talk to it, or go with that kind of those list of questions? Up to you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just off the bat, I think you guys all have really great kind of perspectives and things that you're focused on. I can't answer all the questions. Like, I know nothing about supply chain, especially being in tech. I don't deal with supply chain. It's not an area of kind of focus for me, but hopefully I can, give you guys a little bit of perspective from somebody who's kind of been in your exact shoes, tried to figure out, hey, what do I want to do in my career? What's the right first step? What's the right second step? And then try to kind of build myself up from there. And then eventually get to a place where, hopefully there's some level of work-life balance, some level of compensation, and also some level of learning. And that's a really tough kind of trifecta to get to. And not saying I'm there yet at all either. But, I'm happy to share as much as I can about kind of what I went through, some of the decision points, and also, just kind of tips that I think would have been helpful if somebody had told me the same things back when I was in university. I think just number one, it seems like quite a few of you guys are in your first couple years and trying to still decide on specializations and, just career paths and what options there are out there. I think just number one to that point is you'll realize there's so many different avenues and subspecialties in business, in finance, in accounting, in operations, and whatever it is. And a lot of them overlap, but there's different titles for everything. And so one of the things to do when you're going through university is try to understand the nuances between some of these different subspecialties. For instance, at Deloitte, we have M&A advisory. Now we have multiple teams within M&A advisory. That includes buy-side due diligence, like I said, transaction services. There's investment banking, which is called corporate finance. And so again, naming conventions and things like that also differ. You also have value creation services, which focuses on integrations, non-financial due diligence, so on and so forth. And then with, M&A advisory is one of, I think, 11 departments when I was at Deloitte in Vancouver only that fall under financial advisory. And so now you have a bigger umbrella. And so what I'm trying to say with this kind of particular point is, as you're going through university and as you're networking, try to understand the nuances between some of these different subspecialties so that you really have a feel for, okay, what does this department do? What does this team do? Is this actually where my interests lie? And really get into the nitty gritty of some of these kind of, what the day-to-days look like, what kind of work it actually encompasses. Is it client facing? Do you want to be, in front of clients? Do you want to be back end? Do you want to be working in Excel? Do you want to be working in PowerPoint? Do you want to be doing kind of strategy and operations? Do you want to be doing marketing? Like what's your actual area of focus? And how to actually get the experience that you're looking for out of the role that you're in. And I think that's why a lot of people end up going into Big Four, Big Five, whether it's banks or professional services firms or consulting practices. It's just there's so many different avenues. And so I did find being at Deloitte a really good kind of path or stepping stone for me to figure out what I want to do in the longer run. Because originally when I was in university, I took an accounting degree thinking I'd be going into audit. And I did the whole Big Four, mid-size national accounting firm recruitment, like the 8 hours of standing around talking to people nonstop, just to try to build some relationships and hopefully get a job as an auditor. And then I quickly realized, this isn't for me. This isn't what I'm interested in. And I just happened to meet somebody at Deloitte who worked in financial advisory. This was the first year Deloitte in Vancouver was doing an internship program as well. Before it was all non-entry level positions, so you need 2 years of experience to get in. And so I got lucky, and it just worked out. But what the takeaway was for me there was just the networking, and being able to be open to talking to different people. And not just kind of honing in on one specific category. What I see lots of students do is they'll say, hey, I want to be an auditor. They know nothing about audit, but they say, I want to be an auditor just because, and they'll network with 100 auditors, or they'll network with a crazy amount of auditors. And that's all the experience that they kind of understand is, what does an auditor say? What do they do? That's it. But there's so many other paths for you to go. Where if you start talking to people from different teams, different subspecialties, different firms, industry versus professional services versus banks versus this, you'll get a broader view, and you'll also understand the differences between what this team does versus what that team does. And I think that'll help you make a much more educated decision for yourself, because there are plenty of differences. Being in industry from just a development perspective is different from being in a Big Four, and is different from being in a investment banking traditional kind of work 120 hours until you drop. It's all very, very different. So that's kind of my feedback, or kind of how, when I reflect on my journey to where I am today, is I should have done more networking. I should have talked to people from different teams, not just laser focus on one. And just spend more time kind of getting to know what's available and what's out there. So I think that's kind of my overarching comment. Hopefully it kind of tackled a couple of your guys' comments, because I think that kind of ties things together a little bit.
And to your point of different teams, now if I was a student, like how would I go and approach? Because like you mentioned, right, like you go to these Big Four events, these big sponsored events, all they're going to bring in is people who they're looking to hire. So these very niche teams, right? Even at Deloitte, like when I was going through the recruit, we didn't have that. It was all auditors talking about, I get to travel for work, I get to do this, I got to go to London and all this sort of stuff. It's very, very tailored and very specific, because that's kind of their biggest practice, and that's who they're looking for. How would you recommend students go and find these different avenues and niches and all that? Like, what do they do?
Yeah, there's a few paths. Number one is, if you do know you want to be, let's say, an auditor, then I'll tell you it's a quantity game. It's purely you want some quality in those conversations as well, because you want to make an impact on the people that you're talking to. But very much so, it's a quantity game. You want to talk to as many people as possible from as many firms as possible. And the way the feedback gets generated is based on the number of people that are giving you, let's say, a positive kind of feedback or positive evaluation from the networking session. And so if you're looking for a very kind of more traditional path in terms of career, then yes, it can very much be a quantity game. But if you're looking for a more niche subspecialty, or you're just looking to understand more about niche subspecialties, is whenever you have a networking session or whenever you're talking to somebody, ask for another connect after that. So try to steer the conversation a little bit towards, okay, well, let me take a step back. what else does the team, what else does the office, or what else does the firm provide. And even if they don't have expertise in that area, it's very likely they know somebody in that team. For example, if you're networking with me, a lot of people will ask me about transaction services because of my past work with them, or valuation because somebody's interested in creating financial models. And so, at the end of the networking session, it might be, hey, Kevin, do you mind introducing me to somebody from valuation? I'd love to be able to just ask them, what they do, get a little bit more in-depth knowledge on their day-to-day, and just see what opportunities are out there. And now you've kind of created a bit of a chain reaction because, the moment you talk to one, you've got a connection to another person. And then if you ever want to circle back and say, yeah, you know what, I really like valuation, you can go to that point of contact and just say, hey, I'd love to learn more. Would you be open to connecting me with a manager or a partner or whoever it is? So that's another way. And then the third is, case competitions I find are really great because they're firm sponsored, they're bank sponsored, they're company sponsored, depending on what you're looking for. For instance, the investment banking conference for those that are interested in investment banking. There's lots of other case competitions. I'm sure there's a lot more nowadays than there were when I was there. But those are great because you'll have lots of one, you'll have the judges, you'll have probably coaches that'll help you through. I know at Deloitte we did a national leadership conference program as well, and basically that's a free kind of 3-day networking session in Toronto where our headquarters is, on the Canadian side, and just have tons of Deloitte resources. And that was a great way for students to really identify, like, hey, which team do I actually want to join at the end of the day? Because they had access to hundreds of employees who are there dedicated to supporting them and to answering their questions. So take advantage of all of the different events and kind of the case competitions and programs that are sponsored by firms and companies and so on.
Cool. Another thing, I think we'll deviate a little bit, but I've always been interested, because I remember when I was in second year, having to decide between finance and accounting, and kind of picking, okay, do I go this route or this route? Well, I want to do both. Like, especially someone like myself, when going to the bank, it's like I have personal finance knowledge, I love stocks, but I've heard that accounting is like the language of business, and I want to pursue that designation as well. Kind of what was your, like you said, your data point, your decision point? Like, how did you decide accounting over finance, to pursue your CPA versus your CEFA? Like, what was the thought process like, and what led you to kind of eventually choosing the CPA as your designation?
Yeah, I'll be honest, it wasn't as thoughtful as it should have been. I think it was more of a, okay, I don't really know where I want to go just yet. Let's build up a foundation. What kind of makes sense logically in my head is probably an accounting designation. I know I'm okay with numbers. I don't know that I have the skill set to do hardcore investment banking, but I think I could grind through audit work and kind of get through that lifestyle for a bit, and then go from there, and then see where I end up. So it wasn't a very sophisticated kind of thought process at all. It was kind of simplistic. It was just, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I think looking back at it, even if I was more thoughtful, I think I still would have made the same decision, mostly because I just didn't know what I wanted to do at the time. And so I ended up choosing to go this path. And, if I ended up in audit, I think I still would have probably ended up in transaction services where I wound up. And I still probably would have taken the same path I did, but, who knows? So yeah, I mean, I think overall is, I wanted kind of a very strong foundation from a technical perspective, and not saying that finance isn't technical, but the way I thought about it too, when I was working at Deloitte in my first couple of years is, hey, this accounting work or this transaction diligence, you're very much in the weeds trying to understand and unravel all of these, more complex situations, and they're not always accounting specific. Some are, a bridge between finance and accounting. But the thought process, the types of questions that you have to ask, and just problem solving from a technical perspective, that was really strong. And that's kind of the area that I wanted to focus on early in my career. Because if you're walking into a room with business owners who pass their business down from generation to generation to generation, they know much more about their business than you do. And so you're not trying to go in there and tell them how to run their business. You want to be there to support them in an area that they don't specialize in, which is transaction advisory, which is helping them through an entire M&A process that they've never gone through before. That's usually kind of what our client base look like. And so I said to myself, okay, what would a client not be able to understand or not be able to do or would need help with? And that would be the technical side of an M&A deal, which is understanding working capital, which is understanding earnings, what is normalized versus pro forma, what does definitional adjustments look like? All of these kind of more complex technical terms. And that's where I was able to leverage a lot of my accounting experience and some of my CPA experience as well as working in diligence. It's just those are the areas I needed to focus on. So when I walked into a room and I had a conversation with a client, I was able to build reputation and build trust with them from using kind of a technical perspective. And then when I ended up moving to corporate finance, now you're kind of taking a step back and you're saying, okay, I'm not just focused on the diligence and the technicals. Now I have to look at the bigger picture. But knowing I have kind of this really solid foundation in place, that's all kind of accounting, more kind of traditional CPA type experiences. So, not to say that was the right path, that was the better path, but I did find having a technical kind of accounting foothold gave me a step up just when, I'm walking into a room and trying to give advice to a client. I know lots of people, especially in the investment banking side of things, like they're all finance backgrounds. That's kind of the more typical path, right? If you want to be in investment banking, you generally take a finance path. Not saying you have to, but that's usually kind of what the generic path is. But nowadays, especially over the last kind of 5 to 7 years or so, there's been a huge shift towards advisors needing some level of accounting experience. So I've got lots of buddies in private equity, and some of the feedback they'll give students is I should have taken more accounting courses. They're not accounting fans at all, but they all say, hey, yeah, I really should have taken some more accounting classes, because you can't drive your financial model. You can't project future without understanding the history and without vetting the history, right? So if you're thinking about growing revenue out 30%, that's great and all, and you can justify it, you can support it, you can do all the work that you need to. But if your starting point is wrong, then there's no value in the work that you're doing from a go forward perspective. So that's kind of how I think about it. Understand the history, and then you can use that to leverage the work that you're doing going into the future. So yeah, again, not a very thoughtful overall approach coming out of university, but it is what it is and got me to where I am today.
Awesome. And students, if you want to, feel free to unmute and ask questions. Otherwise, I'll just go from the list I've kind of generated. But again, this is kind of your time. So yeah, thank you for raising your hand, Margarita. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for that insight, Kevin. I was also just wondering, you spoke a lot about what helped and what you think would benefit us in terms of what we should do now and kind of, take more accounting courses and stuff. Is there anything that people told you to do that you did when you were in university that didn't actually help? Like it was basically just a waste of your time or didn't actually benefit you in the long run?
I don't know if I have a great question that's PC for this kind of a conversation, but I think don't worry as much about grades, honestly. I think you want to have a threshold, you want to work hard, and you want to take things away from university, but it's not about 99% versus 95%. Like I get it, you want to go to an Ivy school or Ivy League MBA or whatever, you need high grades, and power to you. But when it comes to business and finance and accounting, or just generally broadly speaking business jobs, it's not about your grades. Nobody looks at my report card nowadays, right? Like nobody cares about that kind of stuff, because they care more about your actual experience and whether or not you can speak to those experiences. So there's, I'm going to deviate a little bit here just because there's another good point here is, lots of people will be really great at their jobs, but they have no idea how to articulate the things that they do. And so when I talk about grades, it's kind of similar, right? It's like, you work hard, you work hard, you work hard, and you end up with great grades. Sure, you can put that on paper, but nobody's going to look at that piece of paper after you get into your first job. And even at your first job, it's not always it's more of a, you have to hit that benchmark. There's usually a minimum requirement for most jobs that you get into, or especially the bigger firms. But once you cross that threshold, there's much less value placed on what the exact number is or what the exact result is. It's much more about what did you take away from those experiences. Group projects, as much as people hate those things sometimes because of, your partner suck, or, you're doing all the heavy lifting, those are all experiences that you're going to be able to leverage after you get out of university. You're working with groups, you're working with people who are not necessarily always on the same page as you. How do you get them to, how do you motivate them? How do you work with them? What if you're on the same level? Are you peers? Are you, somebody's more senior than the other? Like, all of these types of kind of relationships and all of those types of experiences are going to be super, super helpful for you when you're going through kind of your first couple years in the job. And it's not about, hey, did you memorize, IFRS 16 to the letter? No, because there's always a document and a handbook you can refer to. Google's still my best friend, even in my job today. So yeah, I think, not to say I had tons of people saying focus on grades, but I come from an Asian background, and so grades are a big part of the package and barometer for success. And I'm here to say it's really not. In M&A in particular, it's about deals, the number of deals that you do and what you can talk about from those deals. Did you learn anything? Were you leading it? Were you doing a very small section of that deal? Or did you know kind of in and out this entire transaction? That's how I get judged, or that's how I get evaluated, I should say. That's a better term, in terms of how I can speak to those experiences. So yeah, I think that's probably the one point that really, grades aren't huge. They're important, but they're not huge.
Yeah, and to Kevin's point, I echo that, because I would be the first to admit, in my last term, I think I've got all colors of the letter grade, A, B, C, as well as D. And so, and now I have my CFP designation, so that didn't, draw me away from, I worked at a big bank, I worked at all these other positions. And so, it's not, I forgot the economic term, but like diminishing returns, right? Once you hit that kind of threshold, it just doesn't matter all too much. Josh, I saw your hand next, and then I'll get to you, James. So go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, thanks. I was very curious, seeing that you talked a lot about M&A, just the typical process of either being the sell side or advising on the buyer side. I know it's probably, we don't have enough time to go into details, but seeing that I've never worked in finance or any type of IB role or any advisory, I'd be really curious to know like what the due diligence process would look like in a typical deal.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, can you guys still hear me? I had my AirPods died.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So typical kind of buy side transaction due diligence. Usually we get hired when a buyer is involved in a process. And so by process, we usually mean like a bidding war. So usually what happens is the seller will say, hey, this company is up for sale. We want to approach you because we think there's a strategic interest, or that you just might be interested if you're like a financial buyer. And so it'll be, hey, can you submit an offer? Let us know how much you think we're worth, the terms of the deal, anything that's contingent, kind of like buying a house, right? You're submitting an offer with contingencies and with things that you say, I have further questions to. And so a buyer at this point will make a decision whether they just put in an offer, whether they say no and just move on, or they could choose to hire a diligence team to kind of go in, vet the business to kind of a minimal degree, but at least give them some level of reliance. Kind of like doing a home inspection, right? You do a home inspection just to kind of see, does the house exist? Are there broken appliances? What's going on? Like nothing too fancy, just a simple kind of walkthrough. And so sometimes transaction diligence teams will get involved to start going through the business and start vetting the financials. And there's typically three things that they focus on, two of which are early stages. Well, actually, I'd say just one of them early stages, which is earnings. So there's something called a quality of earnings report that typically gets done by transaction advisors. And that focuses on everything above earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, or EBITDA. And the reason why is that earnings number is a proxy for cash flow. So if you think from finance courses, if you were to do a discounted cash flow method for valuation, you want to know what all the cash flows are and discount it back to today. And then the other way to value a business is looking at earnings, because it is a proxy of cash flow, and then taking a multiple of that earnings, and then that's your valuation for the business. And that's typically speaking what you'll see from a valuation perspective on transactions, especially more sizable transactions. There'll be a multiple of earnings because you can go and publicly look at businesses that are listed on the stock exchange. You can look at previous transactions, and you can also just have, business intellect to understand where the valuation kind of sits. And so earnings is the big focus. And so when a diligence team goes in and looks at earnings, it will be, hey, what does the revenue look like? Is it good revenue? Is it one-time revenue? Is it recurring? What type of revenue is it? Is it high quality revenue? And then you'll look at expenses. You'll understand kind of the cost base. If there's things like, currency impacts, is there hedging going on? Is there, commodity pricing that could influence the business? Is there, if it's a construction business, is it kind of one-time projects, milestone based? If so, does the accounting standard match kind of what's reality? Because accounting standards have a certain way of, reporting numbers, right? But it's not necessarily representative of true kind of earnings sometimes, because our perspective when you're working in transaction diligence is once the buyer makes the acquisition, the revenues, the cash flow, it's now changed hands, right? It's now in the buyer's hands. And so accounting might say, hey, there's deferred revenue, or there's, you haven't hit a certain milestone, so you can't recognize the revenue. But from an actual cash flow perspective, it's probably a lot different. So as the buyer, the time the money changes hands or the time possession changes hands also dictates, what's considered your revenue versus their revenue, what's considered your cash versus their cash. So there's a lot of discrepancies that you have to really get, do a deep dive on. If you've got certain, say, supplier relationships, do those need to be vetted? Do you need to understand the contracts and the implications of those contracts? Because sometimes you'll have things like change of control clauses that impact kind of maybe your buying power as a purchaser. So for instance, if you're maybe an apparel company and you've got a great relationship with the supplier out in Asia, and you're getting really premium pricing, but they have a change of control clause that says, hey, we're your supplier because we like you specifically, as in we like the current owner and we have a relationship. But if you change ownership, we will no longer give you that discounted pricing. And so as a buyer, you have to look at it like, hey, I'm going to pay you a certain price for that business. But as soon as I take over, I'm going to lose that premium pricing, which means my margins are going to go down. And so what happens then, right? When you're paying for that business and making that acquisition, you can't just pay them full value because you're not going to be able to recognize the results of that, kind of the benefit of that premium pricing. And so that's just an example of kind of something we would deal with and something we would have to look at. And it all comes down to what's the resulting impact to you as a buyer? How should you look at it from a true earnings perspective? And that will dictate kind of what price you pay for the business. Or how much you invest. There's lots more to it, but that's kind of the gist of it. And then, after the buyer makes their pitch, says, here's our offer, contingent on these things. If they choose to kind of progress into the next stage, then there's another round of diligence, so more in-depth work. Sometimes you get to things as granular as like bank reconciliation work, where you're trying to verify cash. That's a very one-off situation, but it can get pretty granular in bigger transactions. And then you'll do things like working capital, understanding what your working capital looks like, understanding what your indebtedness looks like. Is there debt? Is there lots of cash? Is there kind of contingent liabilities? Are there lawsuits going on? Are there things that are not captured on the financial statements that you need to account for as a buyer? Because as soon as you take over that business, you are now in possession. Same thing as taking over a house, right? Once you're in possession, all the problems are now yours. Similar situation in a transaction. I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what transaction diligence specialists do.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. James, you're next.
So Kevin, I know you talked earlier about like when you're working at a firm like Deloitte or any of the other big four, you're building like a lot of relationships with the clients you're working with. And I heard like similar things from other people who worked at like big fours. So I wanted to ask, let's say I was someone who didn't know what they wanted to do, like what type of company I wanted to work at. Do you think it would be like a viable solution to just go into accounting? Because like accounting skills, personally, I believe they're like really valuable and you learn them. You can just like take your time and learn them during your time at UBC or at university. So I would go into accounting and just start working at one of these big firms and just pray that I would be able to like build a lot of connections and then eventually find a company I like and go work for them. Like, do you think that's a viable option? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably the right thing to say is, you don't have to, if you've got an interest, do what you're interested in. But I get it. Like I've been exactly where you've been, not knowing what to do, and so I think it's a good path. And honestly speaking, like Big Four and bigger consulting practices and things like that, that's their model, right? Like it's a sausage factory. They're literally churning students and interns and kind of fresh grads through the system, giving you as much experience as possible, and honestly not paying you a whole ton, because that's the model, right? Like that's exactly the experience that you're getting. You're getting a ton of experience. You're going to meet a lot of people. You're going to work with clients very closely, but it's a bit of a funnel up to the top, right? Not everybody ends up being a partner. Not everybody ends up being even a senior manager in those firms, and that's fine. Like that's the model. Is they want people to come in, work hard for, I think they've adjusted compensation nowadays, but back in my days, it was for not a lot of money. But you come out of it having much more clarity about what you want to do, because you've seen so many things. You work a lot of hours, but as a result, you also get to see a lot of, different things, whether it's meeting clients, whether it's traveling and being on client sites, whether it's negotiating with, other people from my, experience. I dealt with lawyers, I dealt with business owners, I dealt with private equity, I dealt with accountants, so on and so forth. And so I had a much better understanding of what's out there and what people actually do in industry. And so when I left, I had a much clearer view of what I actually wanted to do. So it wasn't as much guesswork. Whereas sometimes when you do go into industry, I don't know if you guys want to stay in Vancouver or not, but Vancouver is an awesome city, and it's great. But there are, comparatively less opportunities compared to, a bigger city like Toronto. And when you end up in that kind of a situation, it can be a bit of a hit or miss when it comes to going directly into an industry company. So if you go into a smaller business, it is a bit of a hit or miss in terms of your development. Not every company is set up in the way to support younger development. And what I mean by that is if you're looking for a broad experience, if you get hired into an industry, like just, some tech company that's kind of smaller to mid-size, you may not get a team that's dedicated towards supporting your career as much as, say, a bigger size firm would. Because that's the model again, right? Big Four, they understand the model. They know how to push people through the system. Smaller companies, they may be more focused towards, hey, we need you to do this, and that's why we're hiring you, and less career focused. I'm not sure if that makes a ton of sense, but there are differences between how Big Four approach career development and how your typical kind of industry smaller business might. So, you know, if you're not sure, I think it's a path lots of people have taken. You can ask everybody whether they regret it or not. But, you know, I think it's worked out pretty well for myself. And it did give me the clarity that I needed to make, you know, this next jump into PixieSet.
Thank you.
Awesome. Evie, you're next.
As you mentioned that you got your CPA, right? And then you're currently in finance. I'm just wondering, because like people told me like the transition is not that bad. I'm just wondering how it's like your CPA transition to finance like.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. I think accounting to finance transition is nothing too tough. But I think the biggest roadblock for a lot of accounting people or, you know, accounting specialists when they transition to a role that's more finance focused is seeing the bigger picture. So, you know, in accounting, you're very focused on what's correct, what's accurate, what's precise. Like those are the types of words that you would, you know, think about. And when you're more looking at the bigger picture on the finance side and the go forward is, okay, what if I take a step back, what is our overarching objective? What's our strategy? You know, what are the drivers to this growth? So you're more looking at it from that perspective. And it's all about drivers, right? Like what drives this, what drives this, what drives this, not just is this right, is this wrong? So, you know, you go from kind of ones and zeros to, okay, now it's the full picture. And so I think that's the biggest roadblock when it comes to transitioning. It's just the mindset. It's nothing challenging from a technical perspective, because if you can do financial statements really well, you can probably model pretty well as well, because you understand how numbers tie together on the financial statements. You understand how expenses flows through to working capital and flows through to cash flow and so on and so forth. You understand those concepts. And so when you're looking at a financial model or when you're doing the more kind of finance forward looking statements or projections, you kind of understand how each piece ties together. And that's what I found too when I went from accounting to kind of investment banking is, hey, you know, my foundation's already there. I get it. I know how this all ties. I just need to think about it in a different way where I'm driving into the future and not worried as much about 100% precision, but more focused on the overarching strategy, you know, the product strategy, the marketing strategy. Where are my key drivers to growth going to come from? What are my levers? What do I push? What do I pull? So on and so forth. So yeah, it's really about perspective. Right now, just to be clear, like it says director of finance, but it's both accounting and finance and business operations. So again, this is like I was saying earlier, is smaller companies, you have more variability on kind of what you're working on, what kind of experience you're getting out of it. So same thing in my case, right? You know, I have a finance title, but I'm doing kind of 3 different types of roles all at the same time. Which is good. You get some more diversity of experience, but at the same time, it's not as structured as you would get, you know, if I was a senior manager at Deloitte, let's say.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Kachi, go ahead.
Hi. So you mentioned how you explored law and society and other things to kind of fill up the gaps in your during your time at university. So I was wondering what courses and extracurriculars you found kind of gave you the skills that you still use today in your career.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, some of the basic BTM courses were actually kind of helpful because nowadays when you're working in accounting, you're thinking about integration. So a lot of that has to do with, you know, let's say payment processors. And payment processors, in order to even get the financial work, you need to understand databases to a certain extent. And so, you know, the whole BTM kind of concept of understanding databases, understanding how things tie together, how data ties together is really, really helpful. I think somebody mentioned, you know, data analytics, right? Like that's a huge part of businesses nowadays. The ideal, you know, financial person is somebody who can code and understands financial statements. That's a very, very challenging kind of combination. But if you have that kind of both those languages, you're one of the most valuable people in the industry right now. And that's something that didn't exist to the same extent 10 years ago. So it's I don't know that I can specifically point to a BTM course and say, yeah, this was a game changer in my life. And, if I didn't take it, I wouldn't be where I am today. I don't know that I had any courses like that. But I think it's the collective experience of just going through the program, being at Sauder, doing case competitions, working in group projects, and collectively that kind of helped set me up for where I am today. But yeah, I'm not trying to dodge your question. I just don't have a kind of a class that or a specific one that I thought was useful. I think external resources are going to be helpful. Like if you were to go into investment banking, I'd say things like Wall Street Journal, Wall Street Oasis, and frankly, going on LinkedIn and reading press releases for transactions. For people that interview with me when I was at Deloitte on the investment banking side, is I would just say, hey, go look at some of the posts that our team has done on transactions that have closed, and you'll end up realizing there's like 10 questions from that press release. Oh, why did they post valuation? Oh, why did this company who focuses on apparel acquire a furniture company? Or why did this cold storage company buy a warehouse? Like what's going on? So once you have those questions, when you go into a networking session, you're armed with so many better questions than your peers are. And that'll help you stand out as well. Not saying you go into a networking section and all you talk about is work. That's not always the right strategy, but depending on who you're talking to, sounding intelligent and prepared will put you further ahead, and it'll also give you much better knowledge of kind of what you want to do. So not necessarily a class, but just, LinkedIn's been a big kind of resource to just think about, what other questions, what are people posting? Why are they posting? Especially just, I think that's where I found a lot of help is through LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So we'll see if there's any hands. If not, I can ask the final question. Oh, okay, Will, go ahead.
Yeah, I can ask the last question. Just asking on like what you mentioned there, how, there's other stuff outside of the workplace. I see you're like a squadron officer. I'm wondering if you can like sort of speak on that experience and speak on how important other experiences outside of maybe like your career were for you.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing about being in business and in finances general is it's not rocket science. Like at the end of the day, what we do isn't crazy hard. It's not, there's a learning curve for sure, but it's not the most complex situations you're dealing with, no matter how hard you think it is in the moment. Like we're not building a rocket ship. We're not doing any of that stuff. And, so at the end of the day it's a lot of the soft skills that helps you succeed in this line of work. So, particularly, I was in the cadet program since I was 13 years old. And I did a lot of, field work. I went to travel to Wales, spent time with their kind of military and their kind of equivalent to the Canadian cadet program. And then I went back just kind of in a supporting capacity as an officer. So that's kind of a branch of the military that supports the cadet program specifically. And we really focus on training for cadets. We work on map and compass skills. We work on leadership development. And some of the things I learned the most from was being able to public speak. So we would have to get up as a 14, 15-year-old and step up in front of a class of 30 and actually teach a lesson and have a structure to the lesson and understand, what the components of the lesson are, what your objectives are, and have, some thought process behind it and not just going up and speaking for the sake of speaking. And so those kinds of experiences, you would never in a million years think, oh, that totally translates to business. Like, no, not at all. But from a soft skills perspective, understanding structure to a conversation, understanding, even just basic things like eye contact and all of those things. I was able to learn a bit of that from an early age. And that's really helped me to get to where I am today. And it makes me a bit more unique in a way as well, right? Because in business, there's not a ton of people that have gone through the program, and it gives you something to speak about, and it gives you a different perspective on situations as well, because you're able to draw from something that's outside of work. So yeah, I mean, I think hobbies, things you're passionate about, like, don't cut your schedule short because you're not spending time on things that you enjoy. You never know. Sometimes those hobbies turn into something that's connected with your career. If you love gaming, well, guess what? We have lots of gaming companies in the city. And so, you'll have lots to talk about in that interview, because I know for a fact, when one of my friends was interviewing for a gaming company, they asked her, like, so do you play any games? And, she played FIFA, she played the mobile games that the company had just acquired. And that was a great connection point and a great way to develop some trust as well. Well, I don't know about trust, but, it was a great kind of connection point, right? To say, hey, yeah, I'm really passionate about your job, about this company because of X, Y, and Z, and I can actually speak to it. And again, had nothing to do with career at first, but it's it makes kind of the interview much smoother, and it also hopefully makes your time at that company more enjoyable too, if you can bridge the two. But regardless, it can't hurt, right? Playing sports, that's a big thing. I know at Deloitte, we sponsored the Olympic team. We also have a direct kind of entry where former Olympic athletes can, basically get a job at Deloitte through this kind of, I forgot what the program's called, but through a program. And that's because there's a lot of value in competition and work ethic and all of these soft skills that you get as an athlete that carry over to your job in, financial advisory. So yeah, it's lots to think about. But hobbies, interests, keep going on those things. Don't just work.
Work-life balance. So yeah, we're at 4:03. So thank you, Kevin. So yeah, if you guys need to go, please do. But I will ask a final kind of wrapping up question. And the question I always like to ask is, what would you tell your 20-year-old self, knowing kind of what you know now? Kind of what are some parting advice that you can give, if you were, let's say, to jump into a time machine and talk to your 20-year-old self? What will you say to him, and what advice would you have for him?
Yeah, I think one is try to enjoy yourself a little more, and not stress yourself out too much. I think coming out of university, I know it's so competitive for you guys nowadays, coming out of university and even getting into university is just, it's mind blowing how competitive that whole process is, like video interviews and all of that stuff. I led financial advisory's recruiting program for interns and first year hires at Deloitte. And so I get it. I know how tough it is. I know how high the grades are. I know how many, everybody's a president of this, president of that, VP of this, case competition, first place, this, and this. And so it's insanely tough. But looking back on it is, hey, if I didn't do as well on this, would it have made a huge difference in the grand scheme of things? Probably not. And what was more important was some of the relationships I developed while working at Deloitte, and even before that. Being at a big four firm or being in a bigger firm, sometimes the benefit is having lots of peers, lots of people that are in a similar situation. They're grinding through the same things that you are, and to not treat them like competition, but to treat them more like, hey, we really are going through the same challenges. So let's support each other, build that relationship, because you never know where it can take you down the road. Like, I'm still super close with quite a few of my former coworkers. But at the time when we're working through it was, hey, you're there till 2 a.m. I'm there till 2 a.m. And we were so focused on our work that we might not have had as much of a chance to get to know each other as well as we should have. And so if I look back, it's not necessarily, hey, I should have learned this thing or I should have learned that thing. It was more, I should have enjoyed my time a little bit more, because now I'm like, oh, wow, 7-8 years flew by, and Now I'm working for a tech company on my own, and there's not a lot of peers that I can talk to on a regular basis as much as I used to. So that would just be kind of my advice: is try to enjoy your time, especially spending time with your peers and people who know what you're going through, and develop some good relationships out of it. They could also be referrals. So from the business angle, they could help you get a job. They could be the one to hire you. You could be the one to hire them. You never know. Vancouver, especially, is an extremely small market. Everybody knows everybody, basically. So don't piss people off. Don't burn bridges. And yeah, I think that'll just kind of set you up to be very successful.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kevin, for your time, and thank you for those who are able to stay. I'll open the feedback. You don't have to do it here live. Feel free to email me. Kevin, if they want to reach out to you, am I okay to share your email?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, if you guys want to kind of take Kevin out for coffee or virtual chats or what have you, feel free to reach out to me and have a one-on-one. Thank you again, Kevin, for your time. I am gonna be continuing the series. So on April 21st at 7 o'clock. It's not 6. 7. Yeah, 7 o'clock. Rajan Dote, another former TD. I feel like I'm doing all these former TD employees. But yeah, Rajan Dote, he's at Scotia McLeod right now as an investment associate. So he's going through his CFA. And he'll be there to share. So if you guys are available, I will be sending an invite shortly, and just RSVP will do something similar as we did today. So again, thank you for your time. I know it's exam season for all of you, so it means a lot that you guys make the time out, even an hour. I remember as a student, it's like every hour I can get, I want to get that 80%, 90% on my exam. So means a lot to me that you guys are willing to put an hour aside to do this. So I'm very proud of you guys. Good luck with your exams, and we'll see some of you soon. Thanks.
Yes.